Resistance Fall of Man released 2006 as a launch title for the PS3. Coming out on November 17th, alongside the console on release, it was viewed as a key title to help push the holiday sales and make the PS3 a must-have console from day one. Developed by Insomniac Games, the creators of the early Spyro games and Ratchet & Clank, there was many high expectations for Resistance. Gaming outlets showered the game with endless praise, achieving a Metacritic score from critics of a rather high 86 aggregate. It was clear that they viewed Resistance as a must-own for the PlayStation 3. Getting full-page ads across gaming magazines, being the cover story on official PlayStation magazine for the holiday edition of 2006, and almost endless 9s and 10s across just about any critic you can think of around that time. Resistance was making a name not just for itself, but the PS3 as a whole. Official PlayStation magazine gave it a 9 out of 10, claiming that a few minor flaws hurt the overall, but not by much. A 9.5 out of 10 by Game Informer, who praised the game's multiplayer and even said Resistance is PlayStation's answer to Halo. The concept of a Halo killer was big at the time. Halo was considered the undeniable FPS and multiplayer master, so that was in no way low praise back in 2006 when Halo 2 had a stranglehold on just about any gamer at the time. The only critique that Game Informer had was with the story, saying that it doesn't develop as well as you would hope, and criticizing the ending with the only blemish that this game has is the uneventful finale. XPlay reviewed it on an episode as well, giving it a perfect 5 out of 5 score.
Man, this game is fun. A 5 out of 5.
Resistance is so good, it's almost worth waiting in line for a PS3 and getting shot for.
So it was a key part to the PS3 launch plan, but how does it hold up today? Almost 20 years later, is it still the near flawless title, or have the cracks begin to show? Truthfully, it isn't as good today as you would be led to believe. Age has done Resistance no favors. But first, let's take a look at the case. The case art is nice, evoking some despair as we see a Chimeran skull adorned with a helmet across a destroyed backdrop, clearly indicating the marks of war across the land. It does a good job at selling the idea of the game, and the PlayStation 3 logo running up along the side of the case. Something only earlier games in the PS3's lifetime have, because they changed the design when the Slim released later on. The back of the case shows a few more screenshots and has a small paragraph of text that gives the reader a short look into the game's story and talks about it taking place in 1951 in England. The booklet inside is done like a military dossier, which is a nice touch, and the disc is designed like a record. Not overly relevant to the game besides the time period, but it is a nice little touch. Resistance has you playing as Nathan Hale, a US soldier who was sent with troops to launch an assault in England along with the remaining British troops. Dropping you straight into action as your squad is attacked by the Chimera, you're quickly introduced to the action. For what will be about the next 10 hours, the campaign will take you across Britain to combat and learn about these unknown foes, using a variety of weapons and a few vehicles along the way. The controls are mediocre, not really offensive, but they just feel slightly off. R1 to shoot and clicking in the right thumbstick to zoom, when at this point Call of Duty 2 had look down sights with the left trigger and fire on right trigger with 360, and Halo 2 had thumbstick for zoom, but it was only weapons with a scope, not all weapons, which felt slightly better. Another small gripe I had with the zoom function was that getting hit doesn't remove the zoom for you like in most games, meaning that I had to attempt to unzoom and then figure out where I was getting hit. Not a big deal until you get the sniper and then have to unzoom twice to start trying to figure out who is shooting you. This antiquated zoom functionality is really just the tip of the iceberg though. As to showing the absolute age of Resistance 1, the lack of any color stood out throughout the game. Everything is extremely dull. The HUD, the weapons, the environment, the sky, the enemies, the allies, everything in the game is about just as dull as it possibly could be. While I understand wanting to make a dark, grungy environment, the lack of any color at all makes for a pretty poor visual. Even other dark games use color to highlight certain things, and I would have liked to see more color, especially on interactable objects like switches, or even the enemies themselves. I, however, honestly can't believe that this game was being praised on graphics at the time. The absolute lack of color just drowns out the graphics in my own opinion. It hurts the game visually. The PS3 was really supposed to be the next evolution in graphics, but Resistance doesn't really showcase that. Not looking much, if at all, better than Halo 2 or Call of Duty 2, despite what many critics were claiming at the time. While weapon variety is great, the visual variety is as poor as the color contrast as well, making the alien weapons and human weapons not really look all that different in the end. The enemies are complete bullet sponges, with very few reactions to being hit, which means that abusing cover was pretty necessary, as both you and the enemies can just stand and unload full magazines into each other with nothing changing except your health bar disappearing. The game does give you ample ammunition and health to deal with the sponges though, at least on the game's normal difficulty, which helped me learn to just switch off weapons and ammo as it was becoming scarce, because you would inevitably find another treasure trove to replenish them. This does force you into trying many of the weapons in the game, and learning to appreciate each in certain scenarios. The AI isn't that smart either, many times just resorting to taking cover and emptying endless magazines into the direction of the player. It doesn't really seem like they ever really have a plan to do anything. Definitely no real increase over the PS2 days in that matter. At least on normal and in my playthrough, you can sometimes get them to charge if you go somewhere they can't shoot. There were times where I could enter a room, triggering an enemy to charge at me, then back out of the trigger as they got close enough, which would prompt them to reset back to their starting position, despite me being easily reachable just steps away and being able to cheese a few easy shots on them while they walked back. All of this was possibly easy to overlook at the time because many games had similar flaws in AI, and the dark design wasn't entirely uncommon. I remember a few games having this no-color aesthetic to evoke the atmosphere the developers wanted. Along with Resistance likely being the best game at release on the PS3, the lack of competition helped make it stand out and look even better just by being in a league of its own. But time does Resistance no favors. The 360 and the PS3 would get far better games as each aged, and now Resistance looks to be no better than a middle-of-the-road, common fare FPS with a decent enough story and mid-gameplay that doesn't offend, but definitely doesn't innovate, with maybe the exception of the auger weapon that shot through terrain. Resistance didn't take many chances, but that's likely what made it as popular as it was. When a console is releasing, the best thing to do is to just make a game that works and is fun. Resistance does that. The PS3 didn't need some groundbreaking, new genre-defining game. It needed something at the very least to compete with the FPS juggernauts that Xbox had out at the time. But that lack of true innovation makes the mediocre stand out more and more as time goes on. I can't imagine that anyone reviewing this for the first time in 2025, like myself, giving this a 9 or a 10 anymore. That's just outrageous. There is one glaring point to be made, however, that as someone first experiencing Resistance today, I cannot factor in the online multiplayer as it was back in 2006-2007. It is now a piece of history that can never be gone back to. This will be the case for many a game that gets a retrospective view on this channel that I didn't myself experience at the time of release. So my viewpoints on Resistance can only come from the campaign itself. The campaign and story were solid. Solid enough that I do plan on playing Resistance 2 in the future to see how the world of Resistance progresses and find out what changes to the gameplay Insomniac made. And while my review of Resistance Fall of Man has been quite critical, it is still a very solid game. It isn't a perfect example of a shooter, but it's good enough to go back and complete. There have been rumors floating around about Resistance being remade or remastered for modern hardware, and I believe that would be an excellent option to modernize some of the controls and give it a fresh coat of paint, and the series could definitely see a revival. Coming from someone who didn't even play the game back when it was new, I feel like that's a good bit of praise. Ultimately, Resistance Fall of Man is just a slightly above average game that was viewed through rose-tinted glasses at the release of a new console. It's not super worthy of going back to play unless you just really want to experience the story or get into the universe of Resistance. I would wait for the possibility of a remaster or remake, as I think they do plan on going back to Resistance in the future, and to get people into that universe, a remaster or remake would be the best first steps they could make. This just looks more and more the case every day that goes by, because just a few days ago, as of the recording of this video, PlayStation Online removed Resistance 1 and 2 from their online catalogs. So if you do want to play this game right now, you would have to have a physical copy. Physical copies of Resistance are not expensive, currently going for about $8 complete in box or $7 for a loose disc copy. Resistance has never been rare or hard to find. I even got it in 2015 at a GameStop for a whole 89 cents. So it should be relatively easy to get if you do want a copy on the PS3. Hopefully, you enjoyed this look back at what many consider a PlayStation Classic series at this point. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing for more retrospectives and looks into gaming past.